Gentlemen, if you want to look your best with high-quality clothing, then I recommend Main Street Clothiers and Custom Tailors in downtown Newcastle. Mike Caggiano is the owner, and he and his staff have been in the business for decades, and they will always give you the right recommendations. They also carry Rondinelli tuxedos. That's Main Street Clothiers and Custom Tailors, 210 East Washington Street, downtown Newcastle. Call 724-652-3851. Daimio and Olson Law Group, where every client matters. Serving Newcastle, Elwood City, and Youngstown. Daimio and Olson handles criminal law, bankruptcy, civil matters, workers' compensation, personal injury, medical malpractice, divorce, wills, real estate, and many more legal issues. Call any one of their offices in Newcastle, Elwood City, or Youngstown with these phone numbers. Open Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. Daimio and Olson Law Group, where every client matters.
It could be you, it could be me, it could be everything we see. Given the day, given the time, given the moment. It could be you, it could be me, it could be everything we see. Given the day, given the time, given the moment. Some of it comes.
Bringing to NCTV45.
Welcome to the Washington Outsider on NCTV45. This is host Matthew Geiger from the Washington Outsider, WashingtonOutsider.org. Please visit us for our latest take on the news of the day. Well, today I've been watching a lot of the news, and I'm sure you have too, and there's a lot of things going on. We see in Syria, Russia has begun bombing. We've had criticism of the Assad regime. And at home, we're dealing with the 2016 election season, even though maybe we don't want to. But what we notice is a lot of talk about what they call legitimacy of government. What does legitimacy of government mean? Well, you go out, you vote, some other guy wins. Does that mean he's not legitimate? We say, Bashar Assad in Syria isn't legitimate. We say, this person is, this person isn't. What makes someone legitimate? We don't always, in a democracy, we don't always get our way. It's not about always getting our way. It's a majority rules. But in a country like America, where we see just these overall groups that are kind of just divided. We have a lot of polarization. We have conservatives on the right, liberals on the left, what we call the left and right. And from that, we often get into a position where someone's elected and the other guys hate him. If we go back to George W. Bush, when he was in office, everyone more towards the left complained of George W. Bush. And if he eventually lost popularity with even the middle. President Obama came in, and suddenly he lost legitimacy. Even before, there was a lot of kind of backlash from the Bush administration, where President Obama actually received, just complete hatred, called him a failure, everything from the right, even before he sat in his first term of office. Now, both presidents were reelected, so clearly they did garner enough public support to get in office. In fact, George Bush started his first presidency under a controversy where Al Gore actually won the popular vote. But he did, by our electoral system, win. And so when we look at criticism, and we often do when we look at countries that we may not find as suitable, we look at China. Their idea of democracy is a lot more restrictive than what ours, to put it in light terms. But we also look at Russia, and it really seems like this government, the Putin government, is seized power, it's taken away people's rights. So when we come to we do a little self-reflection on our country. Is our government legitimate, and why? Why is our government legitimate, and what makes it legitimate? And you know, again, in a democracy, government is not necessarily in control to do what we want them to do. It's here to voice the opinion, the majority. And at the same time, it's not here to simply, you know, do the paperwork and stuff. It is here to govern. And sometimes government means upsetting people and doing things people don't want. But that doesn't necessarily make things illegitimate. And then there are also a lot of situations where government has engaged in government overreach. Now, this is a bit of an issue because, again, we have some who say, well, that's not government overreach. That's government doing what we wanted them to do. If you're more on the left side, you probably like a little more government involved. And of course, not everyone on the left likes government. If we look at libertarians, for example, they're often lumped in with Republicans. Indeed, they've sort of been taken in whenever a libertarian runs, whether it's Rand Paul or Ron Paul or any other candidate who says they're a libertarian. They tend to go into the Republican primaries. And that's mainly because third-party candidates tend not to get very many votes and actually undermine people who are like-minded of the main parties. What happens is that these libertarians, in a sense of social involvement, they're very conservative in the sense that they don't want government involvement in people's lives every day. At the same time, though, they're very economically liberal. Why liberal? Because, you know, the very deregulation of government, the taking away of taxes, that is the freeing of taxes. That's actually a very liberal-minded thing. See, government needs money to spend. And that brings another question. When is it legitimate for a government to tax and when is it not? You know, there are people on the right in the United States who would say, well, the government's overreached on that. I mean, we look at our trillions of dollars deficit keeps ticking away, going up. But, you know, that's true of a lot of other countries. And we question, is this legitimate government spending? I mean, honestly, when we look at what goes on in Washington, what goes on in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, for example, Harrisburg, they don't seem to be listening to people. They seem to be just spending millions, trillions of dollars without asking. They also seem to be passing regulations without asking. You know, get a car. Something as simple as getting a car inspected to drive has become terribly difficult just because they seem to just pass new regulations on. But, you know, at the same time, we've asked for some of this government. So it really becomes a question of not necessarily legitimacy, but a question of whether or not we're engaging enough in our government. Well, we have to take a break and hear from some of our local sponsors. And when we come back, we're going to continue this discussion. Thank you.
Mary's Middle Eastern Restaurant. Yes, fine Middle Eastern food where elegance and charm meet old world goodness. Great lamb, chicken, and so much more. Mary's, located on Long Avenue in Newcastle. Call 724-652-2447.
Come dine with us, come dine today. If you could use some real good food, there's a place not far away. If you could use a drink or two, or a place to go and play, come to Gallows Italian Villa today.
The Crane Room is a restaurant. The Crane Room is a bar. The Crane Room is a banquet facility. The restaurant will please you time after time with their diverse menu. Ask about their daily specials. See the menu at craneroom.com. The bar gives you an abundance of choices with 35 beers on tap and always changing. Their banquet services are always to perfection. The Crane Room, located at 3009 Wilmington Road in Neshannock Township. Call 724-656-1553.
Oh, welcome back to the Washington Outsider on NCTV45. This is host Matthew Geiger from the Washington Outsider. Today we're talking about government and legitimacy. What makes a government legitimate? Well, you know, in our country we have an electoral system and people vote, and we'd like to hope that there's also the popular vote, but when it happens, people, those who represent us in the Electoral College, then choose our leader. And of course we hope that it ends up being the popular vote, but we've all accepted these rules in this country, that this is part of our country, and it's gone on for generations. And of course, you know, we don't necessarily have to accept everything that's gone on from our predecessors, from our founding fathers, but in doing so we build a country, and we're open to disagreement. Now, what has helped America remain a strong country is that we have a constitution. And part of that, the reason it has done is because it has put limits on government. It has prevented government from stripping away our rights based on popularity. And when you have that in place, you create a legitimacy. And you've also had a history here, so we've created a legitimacy. And also, we've created a system where when you vote in place, your votes being accurately counted. So the legitimacy really comes from both the agreement of being able to vote and the agreement. Now, in politics, we often have disagreements. And if we go to Spain, the Catalonia region, if we go to Ireland, there's areas that would love Ireland, of course, we see a bunch of different issues going. The IRA, it's a terrorist group. It depends on your definition. They're either a freedom fighting group or a terrorist group. But there's been recent activity in the last few months from them, which has been all but gone since the 90s. There's referendum for independence, breaking up Britain. You know, we of course see Ukraine crisis, where we have a government in power that was pushed out of power by a popular uprising. Russia calls it a coup. The United States calls it a revolution, basically, in pushing out a government that was being essentially controlled by Russia. We then had rebels fighting in the rebel-held areas, voting for their who they wanted to be in government, and at the same time intimidation. And so when we look at legitimacy, we criticize them. What we're criticizing specifically is how they're getting those votes and whether or not. We also see a common denominator where when we discuss legitimacy, a lot of times people put in legal. And of course on the Washington Outsider we've discussed before about the difference between legality and right. There's also legality in legitimacy. People don't just vote. People don't just support things because it's legal. Right? You know, anyone with the power to say something is legal can make it legal. Legal is legitimate because people say it is. Now, when we have a huge rift in society, this creates a bit of a problem. And, you know, in the United States, we have this extreme polarization. Does that mean the United States should divide into two? Absolutely not. Does it mean because the guy we didn't vote for gets in office that he's not legitimate? Absolutely not. What it means is that we have a system that is, to be legitimate, must give other people their say. And that's probably one of the hardest things. It also means that the difference between legitimate and illegitimate is, one, support of people, but it's not just who you support, who others support. It's also how they got into power. Have you given everyone a fair chance, an equal chance, to get into, to have their voice into the system. In the United States, there's oftentimes people just don't vote. There's oftentimes the candidates we'd love to see get pushed out during the primaries. In which case, when that happens, the primaries, it's still legitimate even though the primaries have knocked them out, because that's the system. And of course that begs the question, can we change the system? In this country, yes. If we have enough people who agree the system is broken and are willing to take action, we can change the system. In a place like Ukraine, there's hastily gathered votes, meaning they just throw together elections, so there isn't time to ensure that everyone has an equal voice. There's also voter intimidation of violence. And when you have those factors involved, that's when a system becomes illegitimate. So what happens whenever we get people into government, though, that we don't like, that we don't work, and that we just honestly can't stand them and we're completely against their policies? Well, it does us no good to call them illegitimate, because, again, they've been legitimately elected, even though we don't want them to be our leaders. That doesn't mean that we have to support what they say or do. The truth is that democracy is not just about election day. And, even as election day comes, people choose not to vote. I've argued that I would love to see on the ballot an vote to, basically voice your, dissatisfaction with candidates, to where you just say abstain. And that way, when you go into the voting booth, you don't like the guys in there, you can say, I don't like the guys who ran for president. I don't like the guys who ran for the mayor. I don't like the guy who ran for state government. And in that way, your voice is on. But again, election day isn't the only day. Democracy involves civil engagement on a daily basis to be part of your community. Government is supposed to reflect you. So even if the guy gets in power, you still don't have to agree with him, and you still have the right to be against what he has to say. And in turn, and I know a lot of times public officials find that people who don't vote or people who have voted against them no longer have the say. Well, that's not what democracy is. That's not what the Constitution is. And part of a legitimacy of our government isn't just you get elected in. It's also that responsiveness of government. And of course, this has been discussed on the Washington Outsider, here on our video, as well as in writing. So, legitimacy isn't just about how you get elected. It's also about how you govern. And that's why we've had processes in our country where people can be removed, as well as ways we can change our democracy, because democracy isn't just about what was founded a couple hundred years ago. It's what we want it to be. We must, as citizens, choose democracy, and what makes leadership government legitimate is when people get to decide how that government works. And of course there's a lot of people, so that's no easy task. And a lot of times it feels as though we don't have it, but as long as that's there. And of course our government leaders need to also remember that even though they're in power, their power is contingent on people respecting that system, seeing it as legitimate. So when you get into power, you don't have the power to just serve to your constituents. You're here to serve everyone. Well, we have to take another break to hear from some of our local sponsors. And when we get back, we're going to finish up this conversation with a little bit more on, how should a legitimate government function?
Tuscany Square Restaurant, 3470 Wilmington Road, where old world charm meets today's modern conveniences. You'll enjoy their spacious, comfortable seating, their fresh ingredients that go into making every dish, whether it's pizza or that just right entree. Tuscany Square Restaurant, they're here to serve you. Call 724-654-3065.
Whether it's a scheduled appointment or same-day service, DiCaprio Carpet Cleaning offers 24/7 service for commercial, industrial, and residential, as well as fire and water damage restoration. Using state-of-the-art technology, DiCaprio Carpet Cleaning experts are ready to professionally clean your carpet today. Call DiCaprio Carpet Cleaning for a free in-home estimate. Thank you for making us Lawrence and Mercer County's largest carpet cleaner.
And remember, nobody gets your carpet cleaner.
Joshua Son Rehabilitation Center. From the moment you arrive, you know that you're in the right place. Dr. John Wrightson listens first. He pays attention to detail and then makes the determination. Joshua Son Rehabilitation. We make the pain go away. All in a nutshell, 102 and 117 North Mercer Street in Newcastle. Visit Keith and Margot Jackson for that new look. The latest in women's and men's clothing. Treat yourself today. You'll be glad you did.
Hi, welcome back to the Washington Outsider on NCTV45. This is host Matthew Geiger from the Washington Outsider. Visit us at www.washingtonoutsider.org for our latest take of the news and events of the day. Today we're talking about legitimacy of government. Of course, we know election day is just around the corner, and it's an off year. It doesn't seem like it's going to matter much, but get out and vote. It's important, and I say this early, and it needs to be said often. Get out and vote, and if you don't like the candidates, feel free not to check anything on there. Just submit your ballot. It sends a message that you're civically engaged. It also sends the message that you're not happy with the guys on the ballot. At the same time, it also helps keep the guys who you really don't want in. And that often comes down to it. Is a lot of times when people vote, it's because they're so more dissatisfied with the other options. And that's a sad, that's really a sad commentary on, one, the people running, and two, our just feelings as a country. It also leads us to question the legitimacy of our country. But again, we have a system in place that gives a fair representation. We're just not having the kind of public officials we need, the kind of interactions throughout the other days of the year that we need to keep our government running proper, being more responsive. And I think there's a lot of ways we can help solve that problem. One is by, again, being more engaged, talking. And whenever public officials find input from their candidates as distasteful, they don't like it, they don't seem to be engaging, that's probably a good sign that someone's not a very good official. At the same time, when we engage our public officials, our elected officials, there's a difference between engagement and harassment and yelling and just being against things. You have to have civility. Otherwise, of course, people aren't going to listen to you. And at the same time, you can't always expect to have your way. It's not your way right away in America all the time. This is a democracy. This isn't an anarchy. This isn't a dictatorship where you dictate, everyone else gets it, whether you're a public official or individual. And of course it's easy. Why? Human beings are naturally egocentric creatures, naturally very subjective in our thinking, and we tend to be self-centered. We just tend to be very selfish. This is my view. This is what I want everyone to believe. In the Washington Outsider, the blog, I've written about sort of the rise of extremes on this side and this side. And of course on Community Digital News, you'll find the link on the Washington Outsider, where I write a column. I've discussed this too, where the moderates is being kind of redefined as the extremes. So someone from the far right saying, I'm a conservative, everyone else is liberal. Someone from the left is saying, well, I'm a moderate, everyone else is, ultra-conservative hardliner. They're redefining the fringes to be the normal, and what that does is squeeze people out. And that creates the problem of producing a government that both caters to these extremes, is represented by these extremes to the point where the interests of the people are no longer reflected in their government, where government suddenly starts to lose the legitimacy. And so when we go engaging, we have to voice, and not only just voice our complaints, but also give a direction on how we would like, not what we're against, but what we're for. Because that really, if you go through an email, let's say you're a sitting congressman, you're going to see, okay, these people are against that, but I got to do something. So if you see they're against that, you're just not going to pretty much ignore. Maybe your human impulse is to ignore them. Whereas if you're saying, I'm for this, something else, then your impulse, well, maybe I should vote for that too. And again, you know, they have to also have the right attitude. The government officials, people who are politically engaged, have to say, how can we better represent solutions? I have my ideas, but they don't fulfill your interest. How can I rewrite that? And that's what creates a legitimacy in both our society, and that's what heals division. It's what can make the United States a better government, and it can make us, you know, more supportive of national initiatives. We saw, you know, we've seen the Pope come to the United States. We've seen China come to the United States. We've seen Russia, China, and the United States in one day, the beginning of, or the end of September, come in to the Union and give speeches. And in a lot of respects, that was to try and garner some support for their initiatives. And again, we have all these things going on. We have Syria. We have the entire Middle East. We have Ukraine. We have still North Korea. That's been going on for decades. And we've had all these issues. We've had China conflict with the South China Sea. We've had Russia, you know, now Syria, Ukraine, and a whole host of other issues. We have our European partners, which we don't always get along with. But in order to really kind of, you know, what we see is that this leads to all kinds of conflict. But the question then becomes, how do you resolve these conflicts? And when we saw the leaders in the United States, the leader of Russia and the leader of China go into the United Nations, they were sitting there pushing visions, support for their influence in their countries. Now, when they do that, they're trying to build legitimacy for their cause. Ultimately, whenever government comes down to government politics, it's all about what people feel, what people support, what people see as legitimate, what people see as their best interest, what's in their best interest, what options. Whenever, you know, we also look at, you know, going out, let's go outside of politics for a minute. Say we read a newspaper. If we read that newspaper, chances are we think it's honest, truthful. Now, in the last few years, some publications, news broadcasters have lost reputation. Suddenly, their opinion becomes invalid. It's no longer legitimate. Why? Because people stop having faith in them. And that's what happens in government. Whenever people stop having faith in the government, it loses legitimacy. It loses whenever it does something, whether it's a noble cause, whether it does address our interests, it loses the ability to garner that support that it needs to survive. You know, politics and government don't exist without people. And so in order to build that, keep that good, healthy government, you need support, you need legitimacy. And so as we're going through our country, we need, as we go through coming months, years, you know, we need to really, I think, see greater civic engagement. And also, government officials, even if they're on the far right or far left, coming in and saying, you know, we have to create a legitimate government. Because you know what? The Democrats can force something down people's throats with legislation. So can the conservatives. They can use the Supreme Court to legalize this or legalize that. But ultimately, when it comes to it being supported, it has to be legitimate in the eyes of voters, of people living in the country who are going to follow the law, who are going to support the government, pay taxes. Ultimately, if you don't do that, we eventually start to fall apart. Society no longer can be governed properly, and we all suffer. Well, this has been the Washington Outsider on talking about the legitimacy of government. Please join us again, and don't forget to visit us at www.washingtonoutsider.org for the latest take on the news. We do update regularly, so please be sure to read that, and have a good week.
Welcome to the Silk Road Fair Trade Market, home of those uncommon treasures. Wendy Farmery searches the world over to pick out just the right gift. So stop by the Silk Road Fair Trade Market. You'll be glad you did.
Butts Flowers and Gifts offers top quality flower arrangements and gifts for any occasion. The pros at Butts Flowers and Gifts provide exceptional customer service, and each bouquet is hand arranged. Stop in and check out their wide selection of gift baskets and plants. They provide flower delivery service locally to Newcastle, Bessemer, Edinburgh, New Wilmington, West Pittsburgh, and across the nation. It's Butts Flowers at 120 East Washington Street in downtown Newcastle. Call 724-652-7727 or toll free 1-800-443-7726. The Cedars is a great restaurant with outstanding Mediterranean food. The Cedars takeout menu is second to none, featuring pizza, stromboli, hoagies, their famous lamb on the rod, and so much more. So when you're hungry and you want that Newcastle taste, make it Cedars. Now with 2 locations in Newcastle, 827 Addis Street on the east side and 1101 Highland Avenue. Call Cedars East 724-658-9260 or Cedars North 724-652-7657.